Everything is a season, a time for living, believing God is real, He'll guide your way. As you walk, where you go, may His peace guide you on. Be safe in the gentle arms of God. As you walk, where you go, may His peace guide you on. Be safe in the gentle arms of God. As you walk, where you go, may His peace guide you on. Be safe in the gentle arms of God. Be safe in the gentle arms of God.
Good afternoon. I'm Terry Riley, and it's my great pleasure and privilege as the nation of Ballina to welcome you to this most auspicious occasion, the second annual International Human Rights Lecture of the Mayo Centre, which is being cited here in Ballina. It's a big event for Ballina, a big news story for Ballina, something we're going to enjoy in years to come. The potential is not yet estimated by the local population, but believe me, it is big. First, some housekeeping. Exit doors are clearly marked. On the on my right and your left, there are two on this side here there is one, and then that's the nature one. There are toilets at the back here, and of course mobile phones. And I already know that you are a careful and a great audience, so I don't need to remind you to turn them off. But you might excuse me if I turn mine off. A big thank you to the rejoiced Gospel Choir. The Gospel Choir is excited. This is our home, all of the people. Thank you, Dr. Tara Doherty, and we will get further opportunities during the afternoon to enjoy more of their offerings. The warmest of warm Ballina welcomes to each and every one of you, local and visitor alike, on behalf of the Mary Robinson Centre. Believe me, the wonderful interest you have shown by your attendance here today will charge us our batteries to the road ahead. It's absolutely splendid. There are almost 1,000 people now in the church here. A big welcome to Graca Machel, founder member of the Alberts and the National Addict for Women's and Children's Rights, and wife of the great Nelson Mandela. On her visit to Ballina, she is accompanied by her delightful 12-year-old granddaughter, who had the pleasure of meeting earlier on, Machel. Sister Mandela, I think it's pronounced we have come all the way from South Africa to hear grandmother speak in public for the very first time. Now, there's the first that Ballina is honoured to host. A special welcome to, of course, the woman who has made all this possible, our very own Mary Robinson. Yes, that's more than one, that's not. Welcome to the Kahira of Ballina Municipal Council, Jerry Dempsey, the Kahira Community Council, like the homes, Peter Hines, County Manager, the South African Ambassador, Alanjani Sigur, and his wife, Mayo, Magdalena Robert, Special Advisor to Ms. Machel, councillors, Oireachtas members, the board of the Mayo Robinson Centre, representatives from the National University of Ireland, Galway, and our generous sponsors, Electronic Ireland. We apologise for the inconvenience caused by the late switch of venues from the Cathedral to St. Patrick's, but those of you who have been over there recently will know that it was a wise decision, because the work that has been undertaken in the Cathedral is much more extensive than was originally realised. And the Cathedral today is wrapped in scaffolding with a major and very necessary refurbishment on the way. The cost is enormous, but it will be done because it has to be done, and will be underpinned by a very supportive Diocese of Killala, under the guidance of Bishop John Fleming, Brother Jerry O'Hora, our Irish priest, the parish council, and of course, with the help from our friends around the world. We thank Bishop John, Father Jerry, and the parish council for the use of St. Patrick's this afternoon. Around you, you see the stained glass windows, images of St. Patrick. And St. Patrick came this way, and he built this church here, and he went on to St. Patrick. And it's very much part of the Christian way. So I suppose we're blessed in many ways. Here this morning, I'm in the offices of the Mayo Robinson Centre at the Union Institute. A workshop was attended by young participants from around the region, and indeed from around the world. It featured a really stimulating examination of conflict, climate change and displacement, putting the spotlight on human rights and the refugee crisis in Europe. A keen and fortune to all the participants who have joined us here this afternoon. We had, I attended that workshop this morning. It's absolutely wonderful and very much at the heart of the Mayo Robinson Centre, bringing in students to the area to spend a short time here, and they were well with it. And I was particularly taken by Stephen Nganga's contribution this morning. And he's of the Director of Provision, and he's been in Ireland for 10 years. And in that 10 years, he can't work, his wife can't cook in their hostel, and it's really an intolerable situation. So when you hear someone sit up and talk in very different terms of the difficulty they have, we see that the issues that we're talking about here today are so important that we resolved. It's hard to believe that it is only a week short of 25 years ago since Mayo Robinson's inauguration as Ireland's first female president. That happened on the 3rd of December 1990. Will we ever forget it? I will well remember the scene in Dublin Castle and the pride we all felt as one of our own stepped into the highest office in the land. Looking at a large photograph of the event recently, I could not miss the fact that the preponderance of the attendance was then male. Happily, since then, long the hair has come a long way for balancing the gender balance and gender scale. And, matter of fact, I feel a bit uneasy up here. And as we know, Mayo Robinson went on to become the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, and coincidentally, Human Rights Day on December the 10th, only a week or so away. The Mayo Robinson Centre of Ballina will house Ireland's first presidential library, as I said, and will be modelled on the library synonymous with all former presidents in the United States of America. The Mayo Robinson Centre will include a museum, archive, research and education facility, and events venue. It will be located in the Mayo Robinson Childhood Home, just across the road from St. Mary's Cathedral. And if you're passing that way this evening by chance, you will see the house fully illuminated. And yes, the light from Morris and Lutheran shines out from one of its windows, today as relevant as it was in the 1990s. The Mayo Robinson Centre will use Mayo Robinson's legacy to inspire and foster personal leadership in the service of promoting human rights, gender equality, women's leadership and climate justice, in partnership with the County Council of the National University of Ireland in Galway. Courses, as I said, will attract students from all over the world. They come and spend the time here, on short intensive courses, and hopefully coming back later in life with family and friends to spend more time in this beautiful area. The Mayo Robinson Centre is scheduled to open at Victoria House in 2017, and believe me, it will happen. As UN Special Envoy for Climate Change, Mary Robinson flies out to Paris tomorrow for the crucial UN Global Climate Summit. Recently, she spelled out the challenge facing the world, and I quote, "We have very little time left," she said, adding, and I quote again, "We are the last generation to be able to do something about climate, and the first generation to understand how serious it is." The good news is that the message is getting through. There will be climate marches on London this weekend, and tomorrow, Sunday, in Westport at 12:45 p.m, participants will gather outside St Mary's Church and the Church of Ireland to march around the Mall and call on the government to take urgent action on climate change. The Mayo Machel Mary Robinson has spoken so proudly about is alive, well, and very much aware. Machel, former First Lady of Mozambique and also of South Africa, is of course wife of the late and charismatic Nelson Mandela. Let me tell you a story about Nelson Mandela. My wife Mary and I had the great pleasure about 12 years ago to go to South Africa, and we wanted to go to Robben Island for obvious reasons. And we went there. It was a quite shocking crossing, but we were with parties of international people. And we got on the bus to do the tour of the island. One of the former inmates of the regime at the time, previous to that, was conducting the tour, and she asked us to put up her hands around the bus and said, "Where are you from?" And they were from Amsterdam, New York, Cairo, here, there, and other. And we immediately at the back of the bus stop said, "Ireland." And she said, "Oh, Ireland!" "Oh, Ireland! The only people who will come and help people at the lecture colony on this island when leprosy was raging here. They were the Irish nuns and the Irish priests, and we were 20 feet tall." Shortly after that, we went to send us to sell us Nelson Mandela, and then we were humbled, because as you were a man of being Catholic for all those years, you couldn't lie down without touching your head off a wall. And it's amazing to see that a man with such a mind and such a charisma and such a power and imagination was able to survive that incarceration. And no prison was big enough to hold him. And he came out and he began his walk to freedom, or he began to end his walk to freedom. It really something that sticks in your mind. Graca herself is one of the founder members of the Elders and has been particularly involved in the Girls Not Rise campaign to end child marriage. A founder member of the Elders, she has been recognised for her work with UNICEF and on numerous international advisory positions, including the African Progress Council, the Millennium Development Goals Advocacy Group, and the high-level panel on the post-2015 development agenda. Her work is really astounding, as Olivia Leary, who will introduce her shortly, will explain. This afternoon, therefore, we feature two great women, two voices that deserve to be heard. I think you will agree. Mary Robinson will speak first, and then we'll have Graca, Machel, and then we'll have a conversation around the frontier with Olivia Leary and our two guests. So now, it gives me an immense pleasure to call a woman who has never forgotten her roots. A big round of applause for Mary Robinson.
Thank you so much, Mary, and thank you, all of you, for being here today. It really is great to see us. It's very, very special. It's a start, I think, of something that we will become used to here in Ballina, that we have events like this, meetings like this. I had intended to greet some of the dignitaries and distinguished guests who are here, but Terry's done such a good job. I will borrow the South African expression, all protocols of love. Well, I would like to especially thank the honour guard that stood outside of the cove to welcome us, the honour guard of Scouts and Girl Guides. And I'd also like to thank the wonderful gospel choir who sang as we came in and who sang afterwards. And finally, I would like to warmly thank some very hard-working people who helped to put this whole event together and who were making sure that all the details of today worked. And that's fine, it has worked. We couldn't control the weather, but even it is better here than it was when we were coming down from Dublin. We saw the sun, Graca stood out in the sunshine and smiled with pleasure to see it. And I'm very proud of my hometown of Ballina, of my county of Mayo, of the west of Ireland. I've always felt very rooted in the west of Ireland, and I think this occasion speaks to the fact that we can organise incredibly important events here. And this morning, just after lunch, we did meet with the women who took part in the leadership programme in the Human Institute, and we met some migrant women who had come to Mayo. And that was very special because that is really what it's about. It's about making sure that we build a great capacity for leadership, a great capacity for personal leadership, and that we try to build through speakers who will come, through courses, through workshops, a centre of learning and of excellence. It's great that we have this link with Galway University. I have a link with the two centres in Galway which are supporting us very strongly, and Jim Brown, the president of Galway University, is on the board of the Mary Robinson Centre. The first centre that I was involved in was the Centre for Human Rights in Galway, and it really is a first-class centre for human rights, world recognised. One of the early centres, established primarily by a very good friend of mine, sadly deceased, Kevin Boyle. Kevin gives me a certain amount of credit because apparently I kind of helped him to persuade Galway University that there needed to be a centre for human rights. That's much less controversial than my relationship with the Women's Centre, the Centre for Women's Leadership in Galway, because that was a little bit more problematic. Just after I was elected president, a few months later, we got a letter from some academics in Galway. And the letter said, would the President of Ireland come and open our Women's Centre? Now, I was very open to this because I had been involved in the Women's Centre in my own university, Trinity College. I had also helped, during the presidential campaign, to launch the Women's Centre at University College Dublin, because that was a great way to meet people who might vote for me and to be around. And so I was very open to the idea. And my special advisor, Guy Bosby, said, well, you couldn't go especially, but actually you're due to be in Galway in about 2 months' time. Will we tie it in? I said, absolutely. Say yes, tie it in. And the women academics went to the president of Galway University and said, the President of Ireland is coming to open our centre. Can we have a centre, please? Harry did mention, and I was going to mention also, that the 3rd of December is the 25th anniversary of my inauguration as President of Ireland, together with Nick and family members who were present. It was an unforgettable day. It's imprinted on my memory very, very vividly. I remember every second of the day. And I would not have thought that 25 years later I would be standing before this large crowd here in Ballina to continue a kind of interest in and involvement in human rights, gender equality, women's leadership, climate justice. And I'm just going to say a few words about the climate justice, because I think some people sort of say, what exactly does that mean? And I'm so passionate about it now that I just thought I might say a few words, and then of course I hand over to our main speaker, who will be introduced by Olivia O'Leary. I'm quite humble about my interest in and involvement in climate justice, because when I was serving for 5 years in Geneva as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, I never mentioned climate. I didn't see any connection with human rights. Climate was dealt with by another part of the UN, and we were in our silos. I was dealing with human rights, the UNFCCC, as it's called, was dealing with climate. When I finished my 5 years, I wanted to put more focus on rights that matter greatly to developing countries, and particularly to Africa, as I knew. And these were the important economic and social rights, rights to food and safe water, and health and safety. Sometimes in the richer parts of the world we take these for granted, but we don't have them. They are the vital rights, the absolutely vital rights. And there weren't enough NGOs and groups championing these rights. They weren't being talked about enough. So I formed a small NGO. We were based in New York with colleagues in Washington and Geneva, but actually our focus was on African countries. And we decided that we would work on the right to health, we would work on women, peace and security, we would work on the right to food. I was also honorary president of Oxfam. So through Oxfam I was invited to a lot of other events. And it meant that in a peculiar way I was visiting a lot of African countries to speak about these things and to listen to the voices of people on the ground and to learn the realities of people's lives. And I kept hearing this sentence, and yet more or less, oh, but things are so much worse. And this much worse was not conflict. It was the climate change. It was the weather change. I talked to Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the president of Liberia, whom I knew as a friend. I was at breakfast with her when I went to Liberia. And she would say to me, Mary, when I was growing up, when I was a child here in Liberia, we had 2 rainy seasons, and they came predictably within a week. They were never late, and they stopped when they should. Now, she said, I have no idea if the rainy season will come, when it will come, how long it will last. I can't mend my roads, and of course, there are huge problems for agriculture. Another friend of mine from the village end, Catherine O'Kellett from northern Uganda, spoke about the fact that when she was growing up in her village, they had plenty to eat. They were poor, but they had food, because they knew when to sow and when to harvest. But about the year 2000, things started to change, much for the worse. And they had long periods of drought, and then flash flooding. And the flash flooding destroyed the school. So she formed a women's group, and then Oxfam found her, if you like. She's called one of the climate-wise women. And Constance was her first name. I said Catherine, it's Constance. And Constance would speak very vividly about how this was making a huge impact on her community, and that it was getting worse. And these were the stories that I was hearing all over Africa. And I realized that actually climate change is a huge human rights issue, because it's undermining rights to food and safe water and health. Health because in many ways indoor pollution from using open fires for cooking, using wood and charcoal and animal dung means, according to the Lancet, that there were 4 million deaths a year for the last few years from indoor pollution. It also means that trees are being cut down for charcoal or for wood. And so, in a way, I see climate change in a much more positive light. I see the way in which we can move to a zero-carbon world. We can have energy for everyone who was left out of the Industrial Revolution. And there were a lot of people left out. There are 1.6 million people in our world today who don't have access to electricity, who never switch a switch. They light their homes with kerosene and candles. They pay quite a lot of money out of their budget for it. 2.6 billion out of the 7.2 billion in our world cook on open fires and ingest this smoke. They have been left out of the Industrial Revolution, but there's no reason why they would be left out now of the changes that we need to make to move to renewable energy for our world, to get rid of these greenhouse gas emissions. Because we actually have 2 things that are very important, and I'll end with this. We have the gadgets. We have increasingly the possibility of solar cookers, of efficient cookers, of lights, of fridges that are solar, all the ways of changing lives. And we have the technology of the payment. Because people can only pay in tiny amounts, but we have a mobile phone. And most people, even if they don't have light in their home, have a mobile phone now. And they can pay in tiny amounts. So there's no reason why we can't reach those 1.3 billion who don't have access to electricity, and 2.6 billion with some overlap who still cook on open fires. We can reach them. This is a challenge for young people. This is the challenge of climate. That we change our world to a renewable world, and it will be a much better world. And in Paris, in the next 2 days. We need the decisions that will set us on a pathway. Paris won't get us there, but it will set us on a pathway to a safe world. And why is that important? And this is my final point. It is important because every child born today will live through, if they live, will live through what we will leave them in terms of decisions about planet. And either they will thank us for taking the necessary steps, or they will say, how could they have been so selfish, so unthinking? Did they not know? Did they not realize? And that's every child today. And I think that's the most important lesson. We don't have time to forget this or think that it's too difficult. It's not. And it is actually in places like this that we can make the changes, that we can do the resettling, that we can change our habits a little bit, and in fact encourage our governments to move more to renewable energy. I could go on for hours to listen to all these. I'm taking up the time of our special guests to come all the way. My sister Graca, my beloved friend, will be introduced by Olivia, and she will speak on women's leadership. Thank you.
Terry Riley spoke a moment ago about our very own Mary Robinson. Well, listen, I come from the East Coast, and she's our very own Mary Robinson. You can't totally possess her. The other thing I wanted to say was, it's absolutely wonderful to be here on the west coast of Ireland and to look around at what is an international audience, to see faces here from all over the world, and even a costume or two that I've seen from all over the world. As a political observer and commentator, I sometimes get terribly tired of the parochial nature of our political debate. You know, it can come down sometimes to the fourth preference vote in South Kerry or whatever it is. And sometimes it's an enormous relief to be talking on what is now an international stage here this afternoon about global issues. I'm introducing Graca Machel, and she has done so much in her life. She's been given so many awards, including the honorary doctorate, which was conferred on her in Trinity College yesterday. And she's held so many positions, it's hard to know where to start. But a very simple summary would say that for 4 decades, she's been a passionate and an untiring advocate for human rights all over the world, particularly in Africa, particularly for women and children. She was the new state of Mozambique's first Minister for Education back in the 70s. She has produced a groundbreaking United Nations report on the impact of armed conflict on children. More recently, she's worked on reports on rape and gender-based violence against women. She is at the moment, she's so many things. I could be standing here all day telling you about what she does, but I'm just going to choose 3. She is currently the chair of the Partnership for Maternal, Newborn and Child Health. She's the Chancellor of the University of Cape Town, and I had a wonderful discussion with her over lunch about university issues, and they reflected indeed so many of our own. She's also the head of the Graca Machel Trust, and I think that may well take up most of her time. And what she does, and what the Trust does, is it establishes networks, particularly economic networks for women, all over Africa, helping them to take more power over their own lives. Along the way in her life, she was married to 2 presidents. First, Samora Machel of Mozambique, who was killed in a plane crash in the 80s, and more recently to the late Nelson Mandela, President of South Africa. She is now a member of the Elders, the group of wise older stateswomen and men which Mandela helped to found, as of course is our former President Mary Robinson. They're friends and they're colleagues, but they have chosen to be here this afternoon in Ballina for this great occasion. So now, to deliver the second Mary Robinson Centre International Human Rights Lecture, would you please welcome Graca Machel.
When she became the Commissioner, the way she led that commission made of human rights a very integral part of the movement for dignity for all, which had never been seen before. And she remains until today the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Wangari Maathai from Kenya. She was an environmental and political activist, and she received the Nobel Peace Prize laureate in 2004. It was the first time that environment action was recognized as a fundamental element of peace in the world. She led the Green Belt movement to focus on poverty reduction and environmental conservation through very simple methods, just planting trees, which became millions and millions, but they balanced what Mayo was talking about, the rains, and to sustain life for millions and millions of families. Aung San Suu Kyi, she led the National League for Democracy, now to the majority win in Myanmar, first openly contest elections in 25 years, and Mary was there to observe elections. She is actually the lady, as she is known, and she won the Nobel Peace Prize, but she's a symbol of determination, of consistency in her principles that you will find very few political leaders in the world. And she is, in that part of the world and everywhere, really the lady of human rights. Rigoberta Menchú from Guatemala. She is an activist for native rights and winner of the 1992 Nobel Peace Prize. She gave a face and voice to minority groups, and particularly to Indian rights and ethno-cultural reconciliation globally. Gro Brundtland. Today, Mary is telling us about the conference in Paris, which is to start to take place. But it was the Brundtland Commission which, for the first time, raised the issue of the importance of the environment. Had we listened to her and to recommendations her commission made at that time, we probably wouldn't be where we are today, where we feel we are at the precipice of a disaster. And as Mary also has said, it is a bit late, but it's still time. We have no time to wait until we take these very bold steps which are required to reverse the impact of climate change. Now, it sounds like it is a coincidence, but for me it is not. It was Gro Brundtland, Wangari Maathai, and today it's Mary Robinson, who is the special envoy of the Secretary General for Climate Change. And it is Christiana Aguilera, who is actually the Secretary General, who is organizing this whole building of consensus around the conference in Paris. And they are all women. And they are not there standing for women, they are standing for human race. And they have shaped our understanding as a global family on what it is to care for people, to care for the planet, and to care for the sustainability and the legacy we have to leave for generations to come. So with your permission, I would like to suggest that all of us will give a huge applause to those I call iconic women and my leaders. Now, the women's movement is still to be told and to be written. We do not have a systemic recording of how it has evolved. So what I'm going to say today is simply part of my personal reflection, but with the very clear conscience that it's very limited. But I would say, just to remind some of us, that there were times where, when you talk of leadership, you would be simply seeing grey suits and ties, and you wouldn't see a face of a woman. What has happened in recent times is that, yes, in presence, the landscape of global leadership has changed. There is a presence of women. And I would say this means that women have visibility in leadership in different layers of human activities. So we moved from obscurity to visibility. And I would like us to record, yes, visibility. Then we moved from visibility to influence. And the examples which I have just mentioned as iconic women is very clear that they have influenced the shaping of global policy. They have influenced the shaping of our understanding of what life is. They have shaped values which underlies anyone who lives an ethic way of looking at himself or herself and to the other. But I have to remind us that as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted in 1948, it's only 30 years later, in 1975, that the human family woke up and remembered, oh, by the way, it looks like we have forgotten women. And the first conference to focus on women, it happened in 1975. It was almost, 30 years after. Then, and it was called to call for the first time equality of women and their contribution to development and peace. The second was in Copenhagen, and that's when we agreed on the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, and that remains a milestone of the Copenhagen Conference. And it acknowledged also the gap between rights being secured for women and women's ability to exercise those rights. The third conference was in Nairobi in 1985, and set out areas by which progress in women's equality could be measured. Constitutional and legal measures, equality in social participation, equality in political participation and decision making. I'm mentioning this because, as you can follow, it is as if women's rights had to take a slow and progressive, gradual recognition, as if women's rights were not equally human rights since 1948. And that's the point I want to make. In 1994, we had the International Conference on Population and Development in Cairo. which for the first time brought the issue of recognizing reproductive health and rights for women, as the first time where it is acknowledged that women have the right to control their bodies, women have the right to decide how many children they can have if they want to have children. And this is something which comes as if it was not inherent to their rights as human beings. But I want to emphasize the fact that it takes a painful pace of one by one in decades to recognize that this human being who is a woman is a complete human being with rights as really it should be. Then we had the Fourth World Conference on Women. That's when we realized also that despite all agreements, but action for equality and development and peace. Why? Because it was acknowledged there was no action enough. The Beijing conference, it for the first time had to make it loud and clear that women's rights are human rights. So please bear with me that we are coming from a declaration which was adopted in 1948 and only in 1995 the world says women's rights are human rights. There were a series of actions which we have to acknowledge that ever since the Beijing conference, women's rights did gain an impetus, and actions in a diversity of areas were adopted, and since then there hasn't been any other big reflection on women's rights, except that we do have, every 5 years, 10 years, we have a balance of measuring process made. But it sounds like we made peace with the fact that women's rights are human rights in Beijing, and now we simply have to measure progress. More importantly, more governments, I must say even all governments, today is they feel ashamed not to have in the constitution and in their laws and even in plans, women's rights, and something which is aimed at implementation of women's rights. But we are here, almost 70 years later. Women's rights are still not fully recognized, respected, and implemented. We do have we do have visibility, we do have influence, but women do not hold power yet. Power. And I want the relationship of being visible, of being influential, but of being able to exercise power where decisions are made and where decisions are to be taken seriously. That's where we need to be. And where we are, I'm going to suggest, sometimes where we are, we have not been able to transform structures. Structures are still very much resistant to accept the centrality of human dignity for all having to be a DNA of whatever we do as human family and to respect women's rights. Because of that, I will insist on the issue of yes, visibility, yes, influence, but now power. Exercise power in equal position and with equal capacity to insert and assert action, which is not to benefit women alone, is to benefit men and women, young and old, wherever they are, is to benefit human family and human dignity. Now let me come to give some examples of my own continent, Africa. Well, Africa is in numbers actually doing much better than other regions of the globe. Today we have our first female head of state, Ellen Johnson, who Mary just mentioned as one of her sisters. She is the president of Liberia. She was the first actually elected female president in our continent. After a huge, disruption of life through a brutal conflict, she was able to come and reconcile her country. And yes, Liberia is not a developed country today, but it's much, much reconciled with itself because of her leadership. Even when the Ebola crisis erupted, Liberia was the first country to declare free of Ebola. It takes a woman's leadership to reconcile, one, to face a challenge which was of such magnitude, but it was the first country. Guinea has not managed yet. Sierra Leone has not managed yet. But Liberia, yes, it is a good example of how to confront challenges. We have a president from the Central African Republic, Catherine Samba-Panza, and she made it a point that in her government at least a third would be women. Central Africa is still facing huge, huge challenges, but she's a woman of determination. It's a very good example for us on the continent. We have another woman, Amina Gurib Fakim. She was recently elected in Mauritius, and she comes from the area of science. She's a scientist, but she received an overwhelming approval from both government and opposition political parties in the parliament of Mauritius. We have some of our own young women who are coming, like the Prime Minister of Namibia, who is actually a child of the struggle. She was a brilliant Minister of Finance, and now she is the Prime Minister in Namibia, and we are looking forward to the time where she's going also to grasp the presidency. Why do I mention this? It's because an African child today can dream. An African girl child can dream of being president because it has happened before. Before we had those, I'll tell you a story. But if I used to talk to children and ask them, oh, how old are you? And then what would you like to be when you grow up? And we were having some family friends, and there's a child who is the grandchild actually of Edward Mondlane, the first president of Frelimo, a girl, and he asked her, what would you like to be when you grow up? And she said, I don't know. And he said, wouldn't you like to be a president? And she says, how can I be a president? I'm a woman. That was like 10 years back. An African child wouldn't dream of had never seen a woman being a president, and because of that she would say, how can I be a president? I'm a woman. Now, that has been removed from her dreams. and landscape. It is important. It's not enough, but it's important because it shows it is possible, and actually they are being successful heads of states. We have a significant representation of women in our parliament, and I think this is very important to share with you. For instance, we do have Rwanda as the first country in the world in terms of representation of women. It has 63% of parliamentarians are women in Rwanda. We have 5 countries which have over 40% of representatives in parliament. 11 countries which have over 30%, and 8 which have over 20%. This is a progress which was achieved in the last, let me say, 50 years of development of our continent in terms of freedom. And 50 years, you will say, yes, it's long time. It's long time for a human being. But 50 years in history, it's actually a very short period of time. What says is that transformation is taking place. And there is an acceptance that the presence and the influence, and hopefully soon we'll have power of women, has to be at the mainstream. We also have African women who are in the global arena. Well, let's start by regional. Our first president of an African parliament is Gertrude Mongela. She's a woman. For the first time when we had a Pan-African parliament, a woman was elected. Today we have Nkosazana Zuma, who is the chair of the African Union Commission, and it makes a difference to have a woman chairing the African Union. Because for the first time, there is a long-term thinking about where we want to be. That's why she shaped a movement which produced the Africa Agenda 2063, which means 50 years from now. She implements programs which are directly affecting women's lives. As we speak, this year is the year of women's empowerment, and just in a few days, Lusaka is going to host a summit which is going simply to discuss girl child, and particularly the elimination of child marriages. It takes a leadership of a woman to understand that you can't talk of African development if you don't. Women who are adults, but beginning even by the girl child herself. Well, we have our sister, Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, who is the United Nations Under Secretary and Executive Director of UN Women. And yeah, but I have to be honest. The presence, maybe I should speak of Amina as well. Amina Mohammed coordinated the movement which shaped the Sustainable Development Goals, which were simply adopted recently in September. So these African women with the huge capacity for them to occupy these positions. But let's be honest. The structures of African Union are changing because Nkosazana Zuma is there. We adopted the Sustainable Development Goals. It is a bold agenda, and which is to lay the foundations for sustainable development for all of us. Does it mean that we made it all in terms of bringing women to the center of this agenda? The UN Women is not the poorest, maybe the second poor, of all the agencies of the United Nations. What I'm trying to say is, as much as I recognize the developments we have, we still have to acknowledge that there's much more to take into account. Why the UN Women is so funded, understaffed. It is actually, it's as if we want to say, yeah, we have an agency for women, and let women deal with their own issues while other agencies will be dealing. I think we still have to take these issues much more seriously. But I want to bring then, I was talking about the top. I want to bring what I believe for me is the most empowering story which is coming out of Africa. It is those women in the middle who have no much of visibility yet, but really they are shaping what is the transformation of our continent. Some of the women are in the mining industry, like Daphne Machel. She's one of the shareholders, and she leads one of the biggest mining companies in South Africa. As she employs now about 30,000 people. She is really making waves in the mining industry. As you know, South Africa is a very, very developed country in terms of industry, and we have never had that kind of strength in the hands of a woman. We have good examples of young women like Brennan. She is also a young South African. At the age of 23, she co-founded a communications company, which became one of the first companies in the world to offer voice over internet protocol services for mobile phones. 23 years old. Juliana Rotich is a co-founder of software platform called ushahidi.com, where citizens could report incidents of violence, and this came exactly around elections violence in Kenya. And she invented this kind of software which helped, to monitor violence and to report, and of course it resulted in protection of human rights. And these are some examples of what we can show, that there are these young women who are emerging, who do not yet have the visibility, but it's in the area of business, it's in the area of science, it's in the area of telecommunications. I want to come to one of my very, very interesting stories. I helped, and I'm leading a group of network of women in finance. We have 15 chapters, national chapters as we call it. And one of the chapters which I'm very proud of is the Ugandan one. A young lady called Teopitsa Ntale, she started a movement which, just to be short because I have run out of my time, in 1 year, in one district, organizing business, a bank owned by young women as well. She went village by village, organized a committee, these little groups of 5, of 10, etc. In 1 year, she was able to enroll 250,000 villages to be, for the first time, to open a bank account, to begin to manage their loans, and also to have savings. Now they are in the second district, because this was in one district alone. Now they are in the second district. And of course, all the political leadership in Uganda is very, very enthusiastic, and now they are supported. But it takes a woman who, before we started working with them, no one realized that Teopitsa had this kind of potential. Another example is the deputy